Hello students, in this video lesson I'll be explaining to you about the poem Mending Wall by Robert Frost. Now Frost's Mending Wall, which can also be read in full here, was published in 1914 by David Nutt. Now in modern literature it is considered as one of the most analyzed and anthologized poems. In simple words, it means that this poem has found recognition in such a way that many of the poets or many of the critics have analyzed on these poems. Many of the book publishers have also included this poem on their in their books. Okay. Now, in the poem, the poet is a New England farmer who walks along with his neighbor in the spring season to repair the stone wall that falls between their two farms. Now, as they start mending the wall, the narrator asks his neighbor why we need a wall. Now, the poet says that there is something that doesn't love a wall, but his neighbor keeps on saying good fences make good neighbors. If you want to dwell more deep into the life of Robert Frost, then I would always encourage you to Google the biographical background of the poet, because it's always important to Google the biographical background of a poet, because it will always help you to get more clear idea about the poet, and at the same time his way or style of writing a poem. Okay, now in your glossary, in your text, you will see that you will see some minute details about the poet at the same time. Okay, so now Mending Wall revolves around the theme of the necessity of boundaries and the contrasting arguments employed to destroy them. Now, it could also be seen as a difficulty that we face in embracing the new social traditions and rejecting the old, obsolete ones. The poem talks about how outdated traditions can sometimes act as a barrier between individuals. Okay? I want you to open your text and then follow along as I read the lines, okay? I'll read the first four lines. Something there is that does not love a wall, that sends the frozen ground swell under it, and spills the upper boulders in the sun, and makes gaps even two can pass abreast. Now, the poet in the first four lines, he clearly states that there is some force of nature that does not love or like walls, okay? Now, this force of nature causes the frozen ground to swell underneath a wall and thus breaking the wall. And this creates gaps in the wall so big that two people could walk through them side by side. Okay, I'll continue with the poem. The work of hunters is another thing. I have come after them and made repair, where they have left not one stone on a stone, but they would have the rabbit out of hiding to please the yelping dogs. Now the poet here, after in the first four lines, he says that there is this force of nature that does not like walls, right? Now that breaks the walls. And the second thing he says is the work of the hunters. Okay, now he says that the walls that falls or breaks because of the hunters is another thing. Okay, is another thing. Now he says that he often come after them and then fix the wall after they destroy the wall. But here he is trying to make it clear that he is not talking about the hunters, okay, but he is talking about the force of nature that does not like the wall. So he clearly mentions that. Now I'll continue with the poem again. The gaps I mean. Now when the poet uses these words, the gaps I mean, he is actually using these words as a means of bringing us back to his first point that he's talking about, the force of nature. Okay, because somewhere in the middle he talks about the hunters, right? So our mind was diverted towards the hunters and them trying to please their yelping dogs in hunting the rabbits or taking out the rabbits. Okay, so since he talked about the hunters and the dogs and the rabbits somewhere in the middle, he is trying to bring us back to the idea of the force of nature. Okay, now I want you to remember this. In the beginning lines, the poet says something there is that does not love a wall. Now he does not say there is someone who does not love a wall. He says there is something that does not love a wall. So it is very clear that he is not talking about a living being. Okay, he's talking about some non-living being, some divine, maybe some force of nature. Okay, now I'll continue with the poem again. No one has seen them made or heard them made, but at spring mending time we find them there. Now the poet clearly says that nobody has seen or heard these caps in the wall being made. They just find them there, and in the spring, when it comes time to fix the wall, they get together and then they fix it. Okay, I'll continue with the poem again. I let my neighbor know beyond the hill, and on a day we meet to walk the line and set the wall between us again. We give the wall between us as we go, to each the boulder that have fallen to each. Now, the poet says that he reached out to his neighbor who lives over a hill, and they find a day to get together and walk along the wall, fixing the gaps as they go along. Okay, the line, page number 48, the third line, to each the boulders that have fallen to each. Now both of them walk together, walk along. Okay, the poet on the other side of the wall, and his neighbor on the other side of the wall, and as they walk along, the boulders, the stones, okay, which have fallen on their side, they will pick it up and put it back, okay, on the wall. I'll continue reading the lines. And some are loaves and some are nearly bowls. We have to use a spell to make them balance. Stay where you are until our backs are turned. Now, the poet says that some of the stones look like loaves of bread, and then some are round like bowls. So, like, they have to make a special spell to balance this stone that have nearly turned as round as a pole. Okay, so it's very difficult to balance them. So he says that they need a special spell to balance the stones. So what is that spell? It is given within a single inverted comma. Stay where you are until our backs are turned. So that is the spell that they need to use, okay, to balance the stones. I'll continue reading the poem. We wear our fingers rough with handling them. Oh, just another kind of outer came, one on a side. Now the poet says that their fingers get chapped or gets hard from picking up the rocks and then arranging them on one on another. Okay. Now the poet considers this activity as just another outdoor game. Okay. He says that this is just an outdoor game. That's what he says. I'll continue reading the poem again. It comes a little more. There, where it is, we do not need the wall. He is all pine and I'm apple orchard. My apple trees will never get across and eat the cones under his pines, I tell him. Now, the poet says that there is no need for a wall to be there. On his neighbor's side of the wall, there's nothing but pine trees. Now, on his side, it is just an apple orchard, right? So it's not like the poet's apple trees are going to cross the wall and eat his neighbor's pine cones. That's what he tell his neighbor, okay? I'll continue reading the lines. He only says good fences make good neighbors. Now it is very clear that when he says this, his neighbor just responds, good fences are necessary to have good neighbors, okay? Good fences makes good neighbors, right? I'll continue reading the poem again. Spring is the mischief in me, and I wonder if I could put a notion in his head. Why do they make good neighbors? Is not it where there are cows, but here there are no cows? Now, the poet says that he becomes very mischievous during spring season. Why? Because it is every spring that they come together and then mend the walls. And it is only the springtime his mind becomes mischievous, okay? Like when he is trying to balance the stone on the wall, he says that he uses some special spell, right? Stay where you are until our backs are turned, which I've already read before. Now these are something which are mischievous, okay? Now even now, he says that the mischief in him comes alive during spring season. He says, why do he asks his neighbor, why does it make good neighbors? It's not it where we make walls where there are cows, right? Where he is afraid that if his cows will go towards his neighbor's fields and then eat everything, right? So for that reason he makes fences. But he says that there are no cows either on your side or my side of the field. So that's what he's confused about. Why do they need a fence when there is no cow at all? I'll continue reading the poem. Before I built a wall, I'd ask to know what I was walling in or walling out, and to whom I was like to give offense. Now, the poet says that if he were to build a wall, he'd want to know what he was keeping in or what he was giving out, right? Okay, and who was going to be offended by this? So that's what he really wanted to know. I'll continue reading the poem again. Something there is that does not love a wall that wants it down. Now here he again repeats something, not someone. Okay. Now he says that there's some force of nature that does not love a wall, and it wants it down. Okay. I'll continue reading again. I could say elves to him. Elves, are mythical creatures, right? Okay. But he again says, but it's not elves exactly. And I'd rather he said it for himself. Now, here, the poet wants his neighbor to figure out on his own. Okay? I'll continue with the poem. I see him there bringing a stone grasped firmly by the top on each hand like an old savage armed. Now here the poet says that from his side of the field, when he sees his neighbor, he sees his neighbor like a savage grabbing stones in his hand to place on the wall. Okay, so he says this. He is like a savage grabbing stones, okay, on both his hands like an armed savage. Okay, I'll continue with the poem again. He moves in darkness as it seems to me, not of woods only and the shadow of trees. Now, here, the poet, when he reads in the last fifth line, he moves in darkness. Okay, he moves in darkness as it seems to me, not of woods only and the shadow of trees. Now, when he says he moves in darkness, this may mean two things. The first thing, it may mean that he is not actually modernized. He is living in his old tradition, passed on, the thoughts that are passed on by his grandparents or parents, and then he's just living in his old traditions, that good fences make good neighbors. Okay, we always need fence. So this may mean the first thing. Now the second thing, he moves in darkness, it may also mean that since he has a lot of pine trees, he appears to be moving in the dark. Okay, so it may also mean this. Now I'll continue with the poem. He will not he will not go behind his father's saying, and he likes having thought of it so well, he says again, good fences make good neighbors. Now here's a very funny ending. The poet says that he will never go behind what his father have told him, that is, good fences make good neighbors, right? And he likes to think about it so much that he will say again, good fences make good neighbors. Okay, that's what he says, and with this note, the poet ends the poem. Now, before we end, we need to discuss the importance of this poem. Okay, now at its heart, Mending Wall is a poem about borders, right? The work it maintains, it takes to maintain them, and the way they shape human interactions. Now the speaker and the speaker's neighbors spend much of the time rebuilding a wall that divides their properties. Now as they do so, they debate the function of the wall and how it affects their relationship, right? The poet is against building the wall, whereas the neighbor says that it makes the relationship stronger. Okay. Now the speaker suggests that the wall is unnecessary, right? Both practically and politically also. In the speaker's mind, walls exclude people entering otherwise harmonious relationships. But the neighbor argues that the walls actually improve relationships because they allow people to treat each other fairly and prevent conflict. Now, the poem does not fall too heavily on either side of the debate, right? Ultimately, allowing us, the readers, to decide for ourselves which vision of human community is most convincing to us. Whether we need boundaries, okay, to maintain the relationship, or whether to maintain a relationship there is no need for boundaries or borders. Okay, that's what the poem actually leaves us, the readers, to decide for ourselves. We can also see social change here. Okay, now while his neighbor, the poet's neighbor, is very strict, very rigid with his fathers is saying that good fences make good neighbors and that there need to be fence between neighbors, he is very strong and rigid, right? So that's why he keeps on insisting that good fences make good neighbors, and he keeps on building the wall. Whereas on the other side, the poet, he is against this idea, notion, but practically he is also helping his neighbor in building the wall, right? In fact, he even goes behind the hunters, and the boulders which have fallen because of the hunters, he will pick it up and then put it again. Okay, so this picture we see, so we see a social change here where the first one is his neighbor, who is very rigid in his thought, very old fashioned, whereas the poet, in his mind, now there is some change. Okay, though in his action he is like building the wall again and again, but in his mind he is going against this thought that actually borders are not very necessary for human relationships. Okay, so it may also mean the free thinking ideology that is groping in the mind of the present generation at his time and even at our time. Okay, that is all for this poem. Now if you have any doubts, you can always clear your doubts, and until then, stay safe.